Wall Street is rigged. When Wall Street owns a majority of the wealth and they invest in Wall Street, they know when the market's gonna go up, they know when the market's gonna go down, and they all make money while we all lose money. How is that fair? And then after thousands, trillions of derivatives, they want bailouts. They have the balls to ask us for bailouts. No more bailouts. No more printing of money. No more quantitative easing. And the Federal Reserve. And the fractional banking system. Sound money. Go back to a gold standard.
Biggest protest by far. Tens of thousands of people came out on the streets of New York. Whoever would have thought that many would come out 3 weeks after this began? Maybe this can spread in those big numbers across America. It did in the 1960s, and there was civil rights reform. It did earlier for labor. There was labor reform. Maybe you can do it now to get the kind of reforms these people want, but it won't be easy. It won't be without commitment, and it won't ever happen unless they address the core issue of money power in America. It's got to go back to public hands. Nothing will get done unless that happens.
Before these clashes took place, we should inform everyone that this demonstration that took place in New York was unprecedented. It was the biggest one thus far by Occupy Wall Street. And that's because a dozen labor unions joined Occupy Wall Street. We saw transport workers, we saw nurses, we saw teachers, students from universities in New York City and throughout the country all walked out of class at a certain time to join the movement that is being held and pioneered by Occupy Wall Street. Now, this movement, we should remind our viewers, is not just limited to New York. It is caught on in cities throughout the country, such as Boston, Los Angeles, Chicago. That's just to name a few. We know one is being planned in Washington, D.C. in the next few days. Now, this is clearly gaining enormous momentum. It's not just a group of activists. These are now all frustrated Americans coming together with grievances about the way the U.S. system is structured and the way the economy is in decline and not benefiting for the common day American.
Thanks for being with us, Stephen. What do you think the outcome of these demonstrations will be?
Well, I've been watching them very closely. I've written about them. I plan to write more about them. I'm hopeful, but I'm very concerned at the same time. They have wonderful issues they're trying to address. They're all important, but they'll accomplish nothing except cosmetic changes unless they go after the sole core issue. The sole core issue is very simple. It's the power of money in private hands to make more of it at the public's expense. Can I tell you some very important things? And they need leadership. They need committed leadership, city by city. This is spreading all over the country. I haven't seen anything like this in 40 years. This may have legs if they do it right, but so far they're falling short. Let me mention a couple of very important things. On July 4th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson, America's third president, was the lead writer of America's Declaration of Independence. He said in it that the government guarantees unalienable rights to all its citizens. And he said, I'll quote him, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. He said one more important thing about bankers. He railed against bankers. He said, quote, I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies.
There is nowhere left to run. If we lose America, we lose the world to the elite. The 1% will continue to get rich as we all live like slaves. If you think the way of life is bad now, you will all be living in projects like Hoovervilles. We cannot continue to print money. We cannot continue to debase our currency. We need to end the Federal Reserve. We need to get lobbyists, Goldman Sachs, George Soros, Merrill Lynch, everyone out of our politics. Why should they be allowed to throw millions at politicians so they do what we want? They're supposed to be our voice, not their voice. States' rights. When you minimize government, it is easier to control by the people.
The brutal responses that we've been seeing on the streets in New York, do you think that will stop the activists or simply provoke more action?
I think so far it's provoking more. But this is what cops do. Cops beat up on people. Cops enforce the power of the political bosses. They go out. Mayor Bloomberg sent them out. They didn't go out because they want to go out. They went out because the mayor sent them out. Bloomberg is a billionaire. He doesn't want his special privileges taken away from him. So he sends out the cops. They beat them up in New York. They beat them up in other cities. They beat them when they protest the IMF and the World Bank, other global institutions. This is what cops do. The people so far are very courageous. They're keeping it up. They take heart from what they see going on across the world.
Tens of thousands marched from Foley Square to Liberty Plaza, the site of the protest encampment where hundreds have been sleeping since September 17th. The march was peaceful, but police later beat a handful of protesters with batons after they toppled a police barricade in an attempt to march down Wall Street. Police say a total of 28 people were arrested on Wednesday. Meanwhile, smaller protests against Wall Street continue to take part across the country.
Early this morning, police raided the Occupy San Francisco encampment less than a day after some 1,000 protesters marched through the city's financial district. In Boston, protesters have entered their seventh day occupying of Dewey Square in the city's financial district. In St. Louis, police arrested 10 people Wednesday. In Washington state, 26 Occupy Seattle protesters were arrested after police moved into a public park where protesters have been camped out for 5 days. Video shot in Seattle shows police entering a tent and arresting the activists inside. Here in New York, Democracy Now! Was reporting last night from Liberty Plaza, the site of the Occupy Wall Street encampment, when we got word that the police were beating and pepper spraying protesters on Wall Street. On our way to the scene, we ran across a woman being arrested.
What happened? What happened? What happened? Standing on a sidewalk. It's illegal, apparently, so be careful on the sidewalk, guys.
No, you were just standing there. What did they grab you?
They said it was an unlawful assembly, but I was the only one on the corner, so I don't know.
What's your name?
Troy Davis. Troy Davis, Emmett Till, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King.
Minutes later, we arrived at the intersection where the police had beaten protesters on Wall Street.
Long rally called Occupy Wall Street. There's also reports of pepper spray being used on the crowds and numerous arrests at the rally. Thousands have been taking part in the sustained protests to demand social and economic change. Activists say they're fed up with breaking their backs at work while Wall Street bankers' bonuses keep flowing. For more on this, I'm joined by RT's Marina Portnoy live in New York. Hello, Marina. So how did the protests manage to turn ugly?
Well, Matt, as you mentioned, this protest got very ugly. Before it did, about 10 to 20,000 demonstrators were out on the street. But from what we're being told, mayhem actually broke out when the crowds, part of the crowds that formed in Lower Manhattan by Wall Street, surged past barricades around the New York Stock Exchange, and officers moved in to contain the protesters. From what we saw on the video, officers swatted protesters with batons, sprayed them with mace, pepper spray. According to some reports, even one local news reporter was sprayed with pepper spray. His cameraman was hit with a baton. Things clearly getting violent down by Wall Street as this demonstration was carrying on all day long. Cops have arrested dozens of protesters, but the final tally is not yet known. RT has checked in with the New York City Police Department, and they don't have a final tally yet. Now, let's remind our viewers, this is not the first clash between police officers and anti-Wall Street protesters. We saw last Saturday, nearly 800 of them were arrested in one day when they were taking part in a peaceful protest against corporate influence on U.S. politics, against what they call corporate greed, Wall Street greed. The week before, we also saw several anti-Wall Street protesters that are a part of this group called Occupy Wall Street. They were maced in the face by a police officer. Police officers have used orange netting to get to these protesters that they say are acting disobedient. Civil disobedience is the term the police have used here in New York.
Minimize the federal government. When you have big state government, small federal government, our voices are heard at the local level. We can make differences. A whole continent wide cannot control a federal government with a banking system that prints money like it's paper. You can't even call it money anymore. Gold is money. Silver is money. Green dollars are not money. They're using inflation as a hidden tax to fuck the people. Prices go up. Do your wages go up? No. My wages didn't go up, but prices went up. Gas goes up, milk goes up, trains go up. How am I supposed to live? And this is all because our government prints too much money, starts too much wars, so they can sell their tanks, their guns, their missiles, because that's all America exports, is guns, missiles, and tanks. That's it. We need to bring production back to America. And the Federal Reserve. And the fractional banking system. When you invest $100 in a bank, they multiply that by 9 and they send it out 9 different ways. They don't just make money on the initial investment, they make it 9 times the initial investment. That's fake money that they printed out of thin air. Fiat money. It's a fiat currency. Ones and zeros. 1913, this country died when we adopted the central bank and we got rid of sound money. We used to be able in 1913 to walk into a bank and redeem our dollars with gold. Can we do that anymore? No. What's the price of gold now? Almost $2,000. It's gone up $600 an ounce this year. It's going to keep rising. And it's going to keep rising as long as we have bailouts, as long as we have quantitative easing, as long as our government keeps spending our money. Every dollar the government takes in federal taxation is another dollar that they spend. Every time they spend money, that's your money that they send overseas. They bail out Morgan Stanley and then Goldman Sachs. When I fuck up, who bails me out? No one. Why should Goldman Sachs get bailed out? $700 billion in 08. And they want more now? It is much easier to influence governors and mayors than presidents and vice presidents. And the Federal Reserve and the fractional banking system. Stop with the military-industrial complex. These wars. We have our own problems. We don't need to be in the Middle East. We don't need to invade a new country every year to sell more weapons. The only thing that says made in America are guns, missiles, and tanks. Don't forget that. Bring production back to America.